This is part 4 of a lecture series on Plato's Republic. In this episode, we're going to be discussing Plato's Tripartite Psyche and the 4 cardinal virtues. If you haven't seen the previous episode, check it out and I'll link it in the description below. So Plato observes that we suffer a thing called inner conflict. Sometimes we have competing motivations. Part of me wants to go out and hang out with my friends. The other part of me wants to write my essay that's due next week. Since we can have this inner conflict, there must be different centers in the psyche, different parts of ourselves that want different things that can come into conflict with each other. Plato proposes a tripartite model of the psyche in order to explain this inner conflict. This tripartite division comes up repeatedly in future theories like Freud's theory, the triune brain in the 90s, the levels of the generative model in predictive processing, particularly in the theory of motivation and control. Plato is proposing the first theory of the psyche. He's basically starting the subject of psychology. So the first part he discusses is the appetite. The appetite is like a monster. It desires things. It just wants food. It wants drink. It makes things salient to us. So they stand out against the world and call to us. If you're really hungry and you see some food, it's like glowing. It's like, whoa, this thing is just sucking me in like a tractor beam. And so Plato sees the appetite as working in terms of like immediate goals. It doesn't want things in the future. It wants things right now. And it works in terms of pleasure and pain. It's like, that would be nice to eat the food. It'll feel good. I don't want to go and exercise because it hurts. Functions in terms of just pleasure and pain, approach and avoidance. You could probably root it in the neural circuitry and the reward system of dopamine that offers rewards for pursuit behavior and corresponding punishments for pursuing things that aren't rewarding. The counterbalance of the appetite, the highest layer of this tripartite psyche, is the rational self. The rational self can inhibit or block desires based on long-term consequences. So the rational self cares about truth and falsity, right and wrong. It's the human ability to set long-term abstract goals and trade off short-term desires in order to achieve them. In other words, to delay gratification. So like, I want to eat the chocolate cake now because I'm really hungry. I can offset that with the rational self thinking, no, I want to be healthy. And if I keep eating chocolate cake, I'm going to have a heart attack. So as you can tell, the rational self is motivationally weak compared to the appetite. The appetite is stronger and has an advantage in that it occurs first. Things become salient and then we rationally reflect on them in order to change the motivation. The neural circuitry of this would be the prefrontal cortex. The third part of Plato's psyche, which is absent from a lot of models, if you think about Aristotle's bipartite psyche, which is just that we're rational animals, you have the animal self in terms of the appetite, and then the rational self as the human bit on top of it, the rider on the elephant, as it's often described in cognitive psychology. Plato adds a third part to this, which doesn't have a good translation in English. Sometimes it's translated as spirit, sometimes as emotion. We'll just use the Greek term, which is Thymos. He derives this spirit from the ability that anger overcomes desire. Sometimes you want something, but you can become angry, and the anger actually overcomes the desire. It's like a more powerful motivation. And he's correct in that in neural circuitry, anger and fear are in a different circuit to pleasure and pain. So he's picking up on something very real here. Thymos, in this sense, is a socio-cultural part of the self. It's about other people. It's about relationships. It's about social esteem and standing. It's concerned with honor, shame, anger, fear, cooperating, competing with other people. Thymos sits between instant gratification and theoretical abstraction. And so it can focus on goals in the kind of midterm. If you think about it, like, you can trade off pleasures and pains for social achievement. This is what Plato's getting at. So example would be like, rather than avoiding the chocolate cake, I join an exercise group that motivates me to go and train instead of eating it. Okay? Thymos is concerned with the social pressure that can cause us to trade off pleasures and pains. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of conflict between these three psyches. They all work by different normativities. The rational part is concerned with truth and falsity. It's concerned with right and wrong. The appetite just wants pleasure and avoid pain, whereas Thymos wants social esteem, reputation, honor. Okay, so they're motivated by totally different things, and they can easily come into conflict with each other. The appetite wants the chocolate cake. Thymos wants to look good in the exercise class. The rational self wants to be healthy in the long run. You've got conflict. So what is the optimal relationship of these three parts? We can think about these parts of the tripartite psyche as optimized for different timescales, from short-term salience to longer term abstract goals. So the rational part can deal with the future, with what's coming down the line, whereas the appetite just wants short-term salience now. And you can think about that they're all important. If you didn't have that short-term salience, you wouldn't drink water when you're thirsty. You wouldn't eat food when you're hungry. You would die. But the problem is sometimes it comes ahead of it. And so you end up with these conflicts that go on. Each layer of the psyche manifests as a kind of attention. So conflicts between the layers manifest as divided attention. You think about it like you're trying to focus on writing the essay, so you graduate from college and your attention is drawn to, ordering pizza or something like that. It's like there's a conflict for each one to kind of control your attention. And this situation of multiple attentions optimized for different time frames leaves us with a coordination problem for adaptive behavior. If one lets the psyche simply run and doesn't do any effort to organize it, the result is inner conflict. And one, as John Vervaeke puts it, becomes caught in patterns of self-deceptive and self-destructive behavior, which reduce agency and the ability to pursue goals, what's called foolishness. And really, foolishness is not a lack of knowledge, it's a lack of wisdom. It's a lack of ability to bind your salience to what is relevant to your long-term projects of meaning and self-make. What's the optimal arrangement of these guys? How does that work? And really, this optimal arrangement is what Plato is calling justice. It's psychological integration or psychological unity. So this is the way Plato proposes that we align the psyche, which is that rational parts can abstract future goal states that change behavior now. So like, I'm locked in on the chocolate cake, but if I can imagine the abstract future goal state of me with my six-pack abs looking good that I want to get, that motivation can offset the salience of the chocolate cake so that I don't eat it. And if these goal states are socially motivating, so I get the six-pack abs and, everybody on the beach is going to think, oh, this guy looks great, and that's socially motivating, then that in turn adds extra weight to the rational side. So you get the rational and the spirit together in order to train and tame the appetite. Because the appetite is very powerful, but it's misguided. It can't aim at the long-term good. So it needs to be trained by your rational capacity. And think about the word rational comes from the Greek ratio, which means proportionality, which is properly proportioning your attention to what's relevant, to what matters. But then also the social circumstances. So social success has to be aimed at helping you align your appetite to the long-term good. And the result of this essentially is the ability to delay gratification. That's it. To set and achieve long-term productive goals, which is part and parcel really of what we would call maturity, being a mature, fully functional adult. What happens if we don't get this? If this appetite salience machinery is disconnected from the concern about what's good, what's true, we become fundamentally egocentric. We're just doing things that make us feel good, no matter the consequences. And when we're doing that, we're actually getting worse at training the appetite. The inner conflict creates a negative feedback loop. The basis of this, obviously, is addiction is this kind of reciprocal narrowing whereby you're pursuing one salient thing at the cost of all other salient things. And in turn, that's training your reward circuitry to tag that thing as particularly important. This is like a person who does, say, like a amphetamine or something like that, and then gets a massive reward from it. And so the brain says, okay, well, there's no bigger reward than this. So you need more of that, and you do more and more and more of it, and you gather more of a tolerance. So you need more and more of it in order to feel the same effects. And gradually everything else becomes less relevant than that highly rewarding, reinforcing drug of choice. This is a real risk for human beings that Plato's pointing out here, which is that because our appetite comes before all the other things, because we're driven by this, pursue pleasure, avoid pain, we're very vulnerable to these kind of feedback cycles and getting stuck in them, which is what he defines as injustice, inharmony in the psyche, conflict between the parts of the psyche, and the inner civil war. But the opposite is possible, what John Vervaeke calls reciprocal opening. So as inner conflict goes down, the rational part and Thymos get better at training the appetite. So the appetite actually starts to desire the long-term things. Naturally, it desires the healthier options. It's been trained well. Then we become less blinded by salience, less deceptive, less egocentric. And so we pick up on more real patterns in the world, which in turn we can use to train the appetite and the spirit even more, resulting in less inner conflict. So it's like the more inner harmony you get, the more you can use that inner harmony in order to train the whole psyche better into connecting to what's real, what's valuable, what's true. This is like the opposite of addiction. In the same way that addiction narrows the salience landscape just to one point, reciprocal opening is that you can start to take joy and pleasure from everything. Reciprocal opening to all of the possibilities in your life. And that this is essentially what Plato's whole ethics is pointing at. Really, his journey out of the cave that we'll meet in book 7 is a guide, a sense, a dramatic map to how to undergo this transformation. So now we can return to justice. Plato's account of justice is inner harmony. It's the reduction of this inner conflict. So the rational part, the spirited part, and the appetite are all in alignment with each other. And they're connected together. And because they're not self-deceptive, blinded by salience, you're actually more connected to reality. Plato has what's called a virtue epistemology. So as your inner conflict goes down, you're actually seeing more clearly into what's really real. You're not blinded by salience. And this is how we get in touch with reality. So injustice in the psyche, inner conflict, leads to disconnection from reality. And you can see this with a person who's heavily addicted. They can't think about anything else. They're completely blinded by that addiction. Versus somebody who would be like a sage or a saint is completely capable of dealing with whatever comes. They aren't fixated on this one pleasurable thing. So justice for Plato in this case is an intrinsic good in that it's intrinsically desirable, like health. You just want to be healthy for the sake of being healthy, but also it's consequentially good because the inner conflict leads to better outcomes for you. And if you remember, the entire point of the Republic really is Socrates replying to the argument of why it's better to be just than to be unjust. If injustice can benefit you in so many ways, like raise your social status, make you more powerful, give you more money, why not just be unjust? And Plato is giving this account of the psyche to be like, no, if you are unjust, you're going to imbalance your psyche. You create inner conflict, and this in turn disconnects you from reality. There's real consequences of it, whether you get caught or not. If you think about the myth of Gyges that he talks about, the ring of Gyges, in that sense, Gyges is invisible, so he commits injustice because nobody can see him. Even if he's invisible, he's going to suffer the consequences of inner conflict and imbalance and disconnection from reality. He's going to become addicted, essentially. So this is a huge piece of Plato's argument for why justice is always better than injustice, which we will continue in the next book.